Hi, I'm Skylar Whitaker, and I got a lot I want to say about the future of libraries, because what could be more important for librarians to talk about than where we are going collectively as a profession? So, for one of my library school assignments, I read this series of articles about the future of librarianship, and I noticed that most of these articles were basically talking about the current social and political trends that are shaping the landscape of librarianship today. And all this stuff is really, really important. It's really important to know what is happening, what is going on, where are we as librarians located in all of these streams of different social, political, and institutional changes. But I don't think it's enough to know where we are at this current moment. I don't even think it's enough to have a general idea of where these currents of change are taking us. Because every single person has power to make choices that shape future outcomes. And as librarians, we've got a whole lot of power to shape the future of libraries. More power than I think we realize. So I think we need some really strong ethical principles and a coherent philosophical framework to shape our processes of everyday decision making. Because all the little choices that each one of us makes in our everyday lives have the potential to add up to a lot of change. And so it's really important to be mindful of how our choices influence the social and political landscape. I mean, this is basically the Spider-Man principle. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So, in addition to the articles I was assigned to read, I chose to read an article called The Ethics of Fake Reference by Wayne Bivens Tatum, which focuses on a very particular ethical dilemma that comes up in library science education. Because I thought that the particular ethical and philosophical questions brought up in this article have a lot of important implications for the field of librarianship as a whole. But before I get into that, first I'm going to give an overview of the articles I was assigned to read and the important ideas that I pulled from those articles. And then I'm going to talk about what I think this new article about the ethics of fake reference adds to the discussion. So, the first article I read was called The Future of Libraries Has Little to Do with Books by Rosie Spinks. According to a report cited in this article, libraries across the nation are reinventing themselves by increasingly becoming vibrant and attractive community hubs. And they're also focusing a lot on digital literacy skills. Spinks says that we need to reimagine libraries as collections of people rather than collections of books, and that libraries need to be more about helping people filter the vast quantities of digital information that are out there, rather than giving them access to analog materials like books and other printed resources. But Alberto Manguel provides a counter perspective to all this in an article called Reinventing the Library. Manguel is concerned that libraries are going to lose something important if they do not preserve the centrality of the book. Manguel says that, okay, maybe nowadays libraries do have to become community centers that provide social support and medical care and entertainment and all that kind of stuff, if no other institution in society is willing and able to provide these services on a not-for-profit basis. But if libraries are going to do all these different things, they're going to need a lot more funding and resources. And Manguel thinks that no matter what, the task of librarians to guide readers to their books should still be central. To Manguel, there are 3 different aspects that should define the role of libraries in society. First, libraries should be preservers of collective social memory. Secondly, libraries should provide diverse accounts of human experiences and the tools to navigate them. Thirdly, libraries should be symbols of our social identity. The thing is, though, I personally think that books do not have to be central for libraries to fulfill these 3 roles. I mean, I like books. I wouldn't be a librarian if I didn't really like books. But I'm not really on board with Manguel's idea of books having to be central. To me, books are just another kind of information technology, And I think all the different kinds of information technologies should be important to librarianship, from the latest digital information technologies to the most ancient forms of information technology, like oral language and oral storytelling, because words and language themselves are human inventions, and so they totally count as information technologies. Just saying. So, what other articles did I read? I read an article that I really liked by Paul Yeager and Lindsay Sarin entitled, "All Librarianship is Political. Educate Accordingly." This article argued that libraries, by their very nature, fulfill a political function in society, and a lot of the actions of library professionals are inherently political acts. And yet, most library schools do not adequately prepare their students for this reality. Mine's pretty good at it, just saying. But, anyway, Yeager and Sarin said that libraries threaten the politically and economically powerful by trying to empower the most vulnerable and disenfranchised community members to promote equity of opportunity. Educated and empowered masses are much harder for the powerful to control. Yeager and Sarin talked about how it's important for librarians to get to know the particular needs of their communities and to help them get those needs met, both by leveraging the community's existing knowledge and resources and by helping them access new knowledge and resources. So then I read an article by Bill Cope and Mary Calancios where they talked about how traditional systems of knowledge production that have historically been centered around publishing in academic journals are changing. To not be that so much. Cope and Clancis say that knowledge production is becoming less focused on authoritative texts produced by particular named authors, and it's becoming more about collaborations between knowledge creators and knowledge users, where user commentary can be incorporated into the process. They say that knowledge making is becoming more recursive, more responsive, more dynamic, and above all, more collaborative and social. And finally, I read an article by Vivian Waller about the complicated relationship between libraries and Google. Because both libraries and Google provide information services, and so there's a lot of potential for collaboration there. But Google is a for-profit company, while the primary purpose of libraries is to serve the information needs of their communities without exploiting them for profit. So, they're kind of operating at cross purposes in a lot of ways here. So, I'm seeing some common themes across these articles. I see that libraries are becoming more politically aware, more community focused. They're providing more diverse kinds of social services. They're incorporating digital information technologies a whole lot more. And they're starting to facilitate more participatory forms of knowledge creation. So I think that gives us a pretty good overview of the changing landscape of librarianship today. So now I want to talk about the article I chose about the ethics of fake reference. I chose this article for two reasons. One, because it focuses on the one-on-one interpersonal experience of the reference interview. And I thought this was important because all this collective social activity that shapes the landscape of current librarianship emerges from interpersonal conversations that take place within communities that are centered around librarianship, both the community, the professional librarianship community, and the communities that different libraries serve, and all of the different diverse kinds of communities that shape the overall social and political landscape in which libraries are situated. So, I think it's about time that we really looked at these interpersonal conversations and we focused on what happens there. And I think that the reference interview process provides a good structured framework for analyzing the dynamics of interpersonal conversations. And the second reason that I chose this article on the ethics of fake reference is because it does bring in that focus on ethics that I think is really, really important. Okay, so in this article, Wayne Bivens Tatum talks about how in a lot of introductory classes on reference librarianship, it's pretty common for students to be given an assignment where they're required to go to a virtual reference service and ask questions of the reference librarian, and then evaluate how the encounter went. And Bivens Tatum argues that assignments like this are unethical because this is not a genuine information need. At least, you can't guarantee that students will have a genuine information need. And if they don't, they're just gonna make one up, and they're gonna end up asking fake questions and wasting the librarian's time. So, Bivens Tatum goes into this really deeply. He makes two different philosophical arguments as to why these sorts of fake reference assignments are unethical. He makes a deontological argument, which argues that they're morally wrong according to an ideal moral standard, and a consequentialist argument, which argues that they're morally wrong because they result in negative consequences for the people involved. The deontological argument uses Immanuel Kant's idea of the categorical imperative, which basically states that you should treat other people as ends in themselves and not simply use them as means to your ends. Other people can certainly help you achieve your ends, but they should do so by their own consent. This is a thing that they should willingly choose to help you with. And this whole interaction should benefit them too in some way. There should be social reciprocity here. Using another person simply as a means to achieve your goals without respecting whatever goals they may have for themselves is basically exploiting their labor. And this is ethically wrong by Kant's categorical imperative. And that's basically what happens in this sort of fake reference transaction. Because the goal of most librarians is to help meet real people's real information needs, not necessarily to engage in performative exercises with students, especially if they haven't been informed in advance that that is what they're doing here. Bivens Tatum then makes a consequentialist argument for why fake reference questions are unethical. He anticipates that some people might object that fake reference questions might be good from a consequentialist. Sorry, my words are falling apart. Some people might argue that fake reference assignments are good from a consequentialist perspective because they do help the student learn more about how reference interviews work. But Bivens Tatum argues that there are better ways for students to learn how reference interviews work. The student could analyze transcripts of virtual reference interviews with real patrons, because that would be an example of how reference librarians interact with patrons with real information needs, and it would provide so much more meaningful information that the student could learn from, and they could learn from a large quantity of interactions with different patrons rather than a single experience that is performative and not genuine. So, that's that article, and I really think that all of these concepts are really important to our discussion about the future of libraries. We have got to really look at all of the different social interactions that take place within the context of library services and think about, like, are these good social interactions? Are these meaningful social interactions? Are these ethical social interactions? Do they actually help everyone involved to the greatest extent possible? And the reference interview is a really good example to look at because they're really good examples of how the transfer of knowledge and information works as a social process. Because reference interviews are not always very straightforward. They're very rarely a simple two-step procedure of asking a question and getting an answer. Because a lot of the times, what the patron sounds like they're asking for is not what they're really asking for. And it takes some work on the librarian's part to clarify what the patron really needs and why. Because different people might use the same words in really different ways and have really different underlying assumptions about what they're talking about. And so sometimes the librarian and the patron have to work really hard to try to understand where each other is coming from so they can develop a shared system of communication for clarifying the patron's information need and figuring out how to answer it. The Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky pointed out that learning is a social process. We learn through engaging in joint action with another person who knows things that we don't know, who has a different perspective than we do. And by establishing a shared system of communication and meaning-making with that person so we can actually talk about what we're doing together in a meaningful way. And the reference interview is an example of this process. It's two people, the librarian and the patron, engaging in joint action, engaging in talking with each other, basically, and trying to find out information together. And through all this, they establish a shared system of communication in order to achieve their shared goal of meeting the patron's information need. And as Bivens Tatum pointed out in his article, it's really important for both parties to be honest with each other throughout this whole interaction in order for it to result in a meaningful learning experience. The patron needs to be expressing a genuine information need, and the librarian needs to be genuinely interested in helping meet their needs. Because even as the librarian is teaching the patron how to navigate the complex information landscape so they can find the information they need, the librarian is also learning from the patron. They're gaining a new experience that they can use to improve their ability to do reference work with future patrons. This mutual, reciprocal teaching and learning experience is very important, and it shouldn't be trivialized. It shouldn't be treated as some kind of tedious, obligatory exercise. This is a significant social interaction that improves both parties' understanding of how to navigate their respective social informational environments. And this is true not only for the formal reference interview process, but for all kinds of conversations that take place both inside and outside of library settings. I think it's so important for us as librarians to be really mindful of the conversations we engage in with our colleagues, with our patrons, and with other members of our communities, and make sure that we're always doing our best to facilitate meaningful, socially reciprocal transfers of knowledge and information. To get a little personal here, I'm autistic, and I've gained a lot of social and communication skills that most other autistic people don't have. And the whole reason I've been able to do this is because I see this whole process of social learning as an important and vital process in its own right. A process that needs to be gently and carefully and mindfully facilitated. This process can be a whole lot of hard work sometimes, but it is still worth engaging in because social learning is essential for human growth and development, and different people learn in different ways, and different people communicate in different ways. And it takes a whole lot of time and effort and careful attention to make it possible for different kinds of people to learn together and to be on the same page with each other and to be able to work together towards shared goals. And I really think that our primary purpose as librarians should be to use all this information we have access to facilitate these processes of social learning. Because there's plenty of information out there in the world, in both digital and analog formats. The important question for librarians is, what should we be doing with all that information? And I think we should be using information to help people build relationships with one another and to help different kinds of people work together to creatively solve social problems and to invent new ways of supporting everyone's well-being. That's what I want the future of libraries to look like and the future of librarianship to look like, and that's why I'm in this profession. And that's all I have to say about that for now. So as always, thanks for watching. Peace.